The lamp is turned low and I am still in my nightdress, sitting on the edge of a bed that isn't mine anymore in any way that matters. Outside, wheels on gravel, someone's buggy slowing, not stopping. My hands are folded so tightly around a piece of paper that the creases have gone soft as cloth. I can hear my own heartbeat, which is a strange thing to notice about yourself. I didn't know that night that I had already been found out. I only knew the house had gone too quiet, and quiet in our house was never nothing. This didn't start with him. It started months before, ordinary as bread rising, on a Tuesday in early spring when I was 20 years old and thought I understood the whole shape of my life. I knew the hour I'd wake, the hymns I'd sing, the man my mother hoped I'd marry. A steady boy from a steady family, the kind of match that made aunts nod at supper. I didn't resent that certainty. I want to say that plainly because it would be easy to tell this story as a girl trapped in a cage. It wasn't only that. It was also warm. It was also mine. Our days moved the way water moves through a mill. Chores before light, the barn smell of hay and animal breath. My sister's hands beside mine at the wash line. On Sunday evenings there were singings, the boys on one side of the room, the girls on the other, the Osbund hymnal worn soft at its corners from 100 years of hands like ours. I loved those nights. I loved the sound of 30 voices finding the same note without anyone counting them in. I did not go looking for anything else. I want that understood too. But there was a boy who came with the produce truck every second week from a stricter district 2 towns over. One whose rules on courting outside your own circle were not written down anywhere but were understood by everyone the way you understand not to touch a stove twice. He wasn't forbidden the way an Englisher would have been. He was something trickier, close enough to be possible, far enough to be dangerous. The first time he spoke to me directly, it was about nothing. Eggs. Weather. I thought about that conversation for 4 days. What grew between us grew slowly and grew in the smallest places available to us. A glance held one beat too long during a singing. A note folded into the crate he left at our gate, never signed, never needing to be. I want to be honest about how innocent it was. There was no touching, no promise, nothing my mother could have pointed to and named a sin. It was 2 people noticing each other in a world that gave notice very little room. That was the whole of it for a long while. And it felt, God help me, like the most important thing that had ever happened to me. The first sign that someone had seen us came from my aunt, who mentioned at canning time that the produce boy seemed to linger longer at our gate than at the others. He said it lightly, the way you'd mention weather changing. I laughed it off. But I noticed after that how carefully I began arranging my face whenever his truck came up the lane, and how carefulness itself is a kind of confession, if anyone is watching closely enough. Someone always is. In a community built on closeness, privacy is the one thing you cannot grow enough of to hide behind. My parents were not cruel people, and I need you to hold on to that because it matters for everything that comes later. My father had built our barn with his own hands. My mother had sat up 3 nights running the winter I had a fever, praying over me in a voice I still hear sometimes. They believed, the way you believe the sun will rise, that the Ordnung kept us safe. Not from unhappiness, but from the kind of unhappiness that comes from not belonging anywhere at all. When I imagine what they feared for me, I don't think they feared sin exactly. I think they feared I would end up standing alone in a doorway that led nowhere. I told my friend Miriam first before I told anyone else, on a night when we were supposed to be shelling peas and instead let the bowl sit empty between us for an hour. She didn't scold me. She went very still, the way people go still when they're deciding how much of their own life to hand you in return. I know something like this, was all she said that night. I didn't press her. I had no way of knowing yet how much that sentence would come to mean, or how many women before me had sat in some version of this same kitchen, holding some version of this same folded note. The letter that gave us away wasn't even the last one I wrote. It was the first, the clumsy one, the one I should have burned and didn't, tucked instead into the lining of a sewing basket I thought no one else opened. I have turned this over so many times since. Whether some part of me left it there on purpose, wanting in some buried way to be caught. I don't know the answer even now. What I know is that on a Tuesday evening my mother came to my room holding that basket, and her face was doing something I had never seen it do before. I did not know yet what would happen next. I only knew that whatever came, it was already too late to stop it. I'm Aria, and this is Whispers from the Order, where I tell the truth about growing up Amish gently without turning anyone into a villain. If any of this feels close to something you've carried, I'd be glad to have you stay. Subscribe if you want more of these stories and tell me in the comments, Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? My mother did not shout. That would have almost been easier. She set the basket down on my quilt very carefully, the way you set down something that might break or might explode, and she asked me only one question. How long? Not who. Not why. How long? As if the duration of my heart's disobedience was the only measurement that mattered to her. I told her the truth because I had no other language left in me by then. For months. She nodded once and left the room, and I understood that the nodding was worse than any punishment she could have named aloud, because it meant the decision had already moved past her, into hands neither of us controlled anymore. What followed was not a single scene but a season of small removals, each one polite, each one devastating in its politeness. There was a meeting with the ministers. My father present, my mother not, which told me something about how blame apparently distributes itself along old lines. There was a period of Meidung that the church settled on, not the harshest form, not excommunication, but enough. For 6 weeks, I would not be served food at the family table until after the others had eaten. My chair would remain but empty during the meal itself. No one explained this to me as cruelty. It was explained as consequence, as clarity, as a mercy shaped like distance. I want you to understand what an empty chair sounds like at a table where 9 people are quietly stacking their own guilt into the space where I used to sit. My younger brother once slid his roll toward my usual place before catching himself and pulling it back, red to his ears. My father cleared his throat in a way I came to recognize as apology. Nobody looked at me directly during those meals, and I learned that being unseen by people who love you is its own particular ache, different from being unseen by strangers, because you know exactly how much it is costing them to do it. It was Miriam who finally told me the rest of what she'd been carrying since that night with the peas. Her aunt, she said, the quiet one, the one who never married, had loved a man from another district 30 years before I was born. The story had no letters, no dramatic confession. It simply ended the way these things often end, with the man moving away and the aunt staying, and a silence that had never fully closed over in 3 decades. She still keeps his mother's recipe for shoe-fly pie, Miriam told me, and no one has ever asked her why. I understood hearing that I was not an anomaly. I was a pattern the community had been quietly absorbing and burying for generations. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you the community was wrong, and the boy was worth it, and I chose love and never looked back. But that isn't what happened, and I promised myself, writing this, that I would not simplify it into a shape that flatters me. What actually happened is that the produce boy and I never spoke again after that spring. His route was quietly reassigned, and I never knew whether he asked for the change or was given it. What actually happened is that I finished my 6 weeks at the edge of the table, and something in me finished changing too, slower than the punishment, harder to see. The realization, when it came, arrived nowhere near as loud as the shunning had. It came on an ordinary evening months later, hanging wash in a wind that smelled like the whole rest of my life, and it was simply this. I had broken no true harm to anyone. I had loved someone carefully, quietly, inside the smallest margins the world had left me, and the punishment had never really been about protecting the community from danger. It had been about protecting the community from the question I represented, the question of whether the boundaries were rules from God or rules from habit, worn so long no one remembered which. I did not leave the church because of that question. I stayed. But I stayed differently, with my eyes open in a way they hadn't been before. I think in the end both things are true, and I've stopped needing them not to be. My community gave me a wholeness I have never found anywhere else. The singing, the hands at the wash line, my mother's 3 sleepless nights over my childhood fever. And it also asked me at 20, to sit at the edge of my own family's table as a kind of lesson. I don't think either truth cancels the other. I think that's simply what it costs to belong to something built by people, which is to say something imperfect, which is to say something human. If you've ever loved a person or a choice that the people around you decided was the wrong one, you already know this feeling I'm describing, even if your table looked nothing like mine, even if your rules had no name like Ordnung or Meidung. Somewhere you have your own empty chair. I hope wherever you are now that you've found your way back to a full one, yours chosen with your name on it. The lamp in my room burned low that whole spring, the same lamp I started this story beside, and some nights I still light one just like it, not out of grief anymore, but so I remember exactly how far I've walked since that Tuesday when the basket came out from its hiding place and everything quietly began.